Say,
Hi, I'm Lucy Rose. I'm Sheldon's wife. I'm a freelance illustrator and I also work at Blick. I have been trying to make my way as a freelance illustrator for, I want to say like over a year, and I've been exploring ways to make that happen, especially through zine making. Okay, so I finally decided I want to be a real life illustrator and I want to make my living doing what I really care about, which is telling stories through drawing and writing and making comics and that kind of thing. But I felt like I had like two options and I didn't really like either of the options. Option one, I could do make my way through social media, through the internet, through blogging, and build up my career in that way. Or I could go the more traditional way of becoming a part of publishing and advertising illustration and more kind of typical ways of being an illustrator, sort of the traditional modes of doing it. And I felt like both of those options were really scary to me. And so zine making felt like a middle ground where I would still have the connection to a group of people the way I would if I built my career through social media, but I would also be creating physical artifacts, and my work would not exclusively exist in a digital or online form. I was getting really frustrated being a blogger, and I wanted to see my work in other people's hands where they could touch it and cherish it and have it be a part of their daily life, as opposed to being something fuzzy on a screen. And with the touch of a button, like you can turn off the computer and my work goes out of existence. I wanted something that has staying power. But I was also intimidated by traditional forms like publishing. Getting something published just completely scared me. So, yeah. But zine making, it felt really DIY, and it comes from a really gritty DIY tradition, so it felt super accessible. That is totally dependent on a number of factors. For instance, how many zines are you making? Like, are you trying to reproduce this 20 times, 60 times, 5? How polished do you want it to be? I go for a very high standard of polishedness in my zine making, but the beauty of zines is that they run the gamut from kind of homebrew, like scraps of paper stapled together, to like full-fledged books. So decide how much polish you want, and then what are you using to make your zine. That will also impact the amount of time it takes. I feel like for me, the last zine I made was on the risograph. It was these two little guys. These two, I calculated, took me about 25 hours each. And that is not, that is counting the time it took to assemble 60 of each of these. So it took me 25 hours of actually sitting down and doing the work, plus add on the time it took to conceive of what I was making. This is a really tiny zine. It is not much bigger than the palm of my hand. It has, It has 4 sheets of paper inside, double-sided. So each page is 1 sheet of paper, and also the cover. This is super, super simple. But even this super simple thing took a week. I think if you are really dedicated, it could take you probably a week. If you're making like the world's most basic zine, you could do it in a day. I have made a zine in a day. Yeah, but if you're making any kind of high volume thing, it usually will take extra time. Like if you're making more than one copy, that will take extra time because you have to digitize it or whatever printing mechanism. Purely coming at it from my point of view, and everything I'm telling you in this video is totally subjective to me, my experience. There are hundreds of thousands of other people making zines, so this is just Lucy Rose. But I like to think of my zines or of zine making as making like a beautiful little pebble or seashell or like a little gem of a thing. I think when I approach a zine, I want it to be a self-contained, beautiful little experience. So what I mean by that is a zine is not a novel, it's not a Dickens novel where you can just go for years and like explore generations of characters or whatever. A zine is pretty small of a unit. So when I'm kind of making one, I kind of just try to focus in on one thing that I'm trying to do in it. For instance, one of the zines that I made is literally the only thing I talk about in this zine is what it's like for me to have curly hair. So this, I think it's 16 pages of comics, and it's literally just me talking about growing up with curly wild hair. So I basically took a very small story that I wanted to tell, and I feel like I can tackle that small story in this format. There were other things that I wish I could have said in this after I was done with it, but for the most part, I said the thing I wanted to say in a very small format. And when I'm conceiving of it, because I'm the one who makes all my zines, I have to think about, okay, in my little object, my zine gem, I'm going to have to solve the problem of the cover, the staple that's stapling it together, or the little stitching, or if I'm going to include a note from the author, or I have to come at the whole project as like a whole. Something that I do, which I think is kind of weird, I don't know that other people do this, but I will create a blank zine and compose the contents based on how thick I want it to feel in your hand, which is, I feel like that illustrates kind of what I'm saying about thinking in terms of a whole beautifully formed little object. So for instance, with this zine, before I launched into the actual drawings, I made a little mock version of this zine, and I just tested out what is the minimum number of pages that make me feel good about holding this little thing in my hand. And I pretty much discovered that the minimum was 4 pages. So I was like, all right, this is going to be a 4-page zine. And I felt like I could go more and that would still be really pleasing to handle. but I felt like less just felt like this is like a pamphlet that I got at the state park or something. And I was like, eh. So yeah, I'm conceiving, I personally, my process is to conceive of it in a very kind of pragmatic way. I like to start off making the zine for myself first. Again, this is just Lucy Rose method of making a zine. This is just my personal process. But I feel like if my focus at the beginning is what am I really excited to talk about or draw or tell, that starting from that place of excitement about the story that I want to tell usually has to be the starting place for me, because I've found that being excited about telling the thing I like will carry me through the ups and downs of the production process. And if I'm really excited about something, it'll carry me through the hard parts of it. I feel like also starting with myself and my interests and my passions, ultimately, it sounds kind of selfish, but ultimately it does serve my audience better, because listening to a story from somebody or interacting with an artifact by somebody who was excited and sort of passionate about what they were doing versus somebody who was apathetic and kind of felt kind of obligated is a lot. My audience gets a better experience when I'm doing something I'm passionate about. So I don't feel guilty by prioritizing my own interests. That being said, I also have a really just firm commitment in my own process to delivering something good. Like, I definitely consider my audience when it comes to the production value of what I'm making. I'm always trying to alienate myself from my zines and pretend that I'm somebody getting one in the mail so that I can gauge whether I'm giving something good or if I'm providing something special or unique or exciting to them. So sometimes I feel like I'm making a zine and just like dancing like nobody's watching. For instance, when I made my zine for February of 2018, I didn't spend a lot. I just spent time thinking of like, ooh, I want to do this weird, cool thing, and I'm just gonna do it. I don't even know if people are gonna get it. Like, I didn't know if it made sense to people, but I decided to just make it anyway because I was really excited about my idea. So I made this portfolio of prints, and I made up this like really silly story about how these are prints that were inherited by you. Anyway, I just made a bunch of prints and put them in this little fake portfolio, and I typed up a letter and included it, and I just sent this. And I didn't know, when I say I was dancing like nobody was watching, I didn't know if people were gonna be like, what did you make? Like, I don't get it. Or they actually responded and really liked this zine. Like, this is most of my readers' favorite zine that I've ever made. But that was an example of a time where I wanted to do something and I didn't let the audience part kind of get in the way until after the fact, and I just kind of let it like, okay, here goes. And sometimes another trick that I like to do is sometimes I will design a zine for a specific person. Starting with a particular single audience member is a really good place to start. I have started several zines where I'm like, all right, I want to make a zine for my niece. I want to make a zine for this girl I went to school with in the 4th grade. Those have been some of my best work. Or one time I started a zine because I wanted to make a gift for my close friends' children. You'll notice like a lot of children's book writers that you would know of, like Beatrix Potter started off, Peter Rabbit started because she was writing to a single kid. I know myself pretty well in my process because I've now done almost 15 zines in the past year. So I've observed my own weaknesses when it comes to thinking about my audience. So I'm pretty careful about when during the process I allow myself to start thinking like an audience member. Because if I'm not careful, I will scare myself out of making a zine. And I'll get so much in my head that I won't be able to even move forward past the design stage or whatever. So I personally don't want to start considering the audience in a very serious way. I always know, there's always a part of my head that knows I'm making something that other people can enjoy. I'm not trying to say that I'm making stuff that only I will enjoy. I usually have a pretty decent sense, okay, this will translate to something that a lot of people could enjoy. But I don't let other people look at what I'm making until I have a first draft. Until I've gotten past the point of no return. Because if I do that, if I show somebody my work at the wrong time, I will get their voice in my head. And for me, it's really important to not have other people's voices in my head until I've gotten the hardest part done. Which for me, the hardest part is the first draft. When I collaborated with my dad, one of the reasons it worked the way it did is that we had created a really specific structure for how we were going about it. Basically, my dad and I made a correspondence between 2 made-up characters, one that I made up and one that he made up. The structure was super clear. I write a letter and illustrate it. He writes one in response back. So I personally struggle with organization and deadlines and staying on top of a project and pulling it to completion. So for me, working within the rigid confines of a letter correspondence made it easier to collaborate. I could imagine trying to collaborate with somebody, another artist or writer or whatever, and really struggling to complete it if there weren't like a very, okay, this is what we're doing, this is how long we're doing it, this is what we're going to have at the end of this. Other people have other strengths, and I could see that working for somebody else. But this is the only zine I've collaborated on because I trusted the structure would carry us through. It takes a surprisingly long time to make a zine. I kind of described it earlier, like even just making a teeny tiny little zine, if you're reproducing it, it is going to take a very, like, at least when I do it, it takes a really long time. And I'm always surprised at how long it takes, because I can go from, oh, I did the drawings in a day, so it shouldn't take me that long to make the zine. I usually, if I think that, I usually end up being wrong. It usually ends up taking a really long time. I think other surprises are, well, it doesn't have to take a long time though. That's the thing. It's, you make the rules of your zine. I have made my specific rules of how I make zines and how I approach my levels of quality, my production, how I approach my relationship to the audience and like the voices in my head. But the cool thing about zines, and the thing, one of the main reasons I got into it, is that you really are the boss of this process, and it's really fun. So it takes me a surprisingly long time to make zines. It might take you a day, and you could still make an awesome zine. You could make an awesome zine in 4 hours. So just everything I've said is about my process, and it does not at all have to apply to how you go about making your zine. I also, over the almost year and a half that I've been making zines, I've noticed I've treated myself like the subject of a science experiment, and I've noticed my own law of undulation when it comes to producing my zine. Like, I always go through this up and down thing where I start off like, what am I gonna do? I don't know, I'm super stressed. Oh my gosh, I have this awesome idea. This is gonna be the best zine ever. I'm making it. And then, oh my gosh, now I have to digitize it and put it on the computer, and I'm so bored, and this is so stupid. I'm running into all sorts of roadblocks. And then, oh, I kind of pushed past the roadblocks, and now I'm having so much fun. And then, oh my gosh, the printer is awful. So I just make room for the law of undulation at this point. I just, from the outset, understand I will run into at least 5 different barriers to making the zine a reality. And I just expect that from the outset. So that is what I would say. Expect problems. You will run into very annoying things that will make you want to drop the project. Some surprises that I have run into are, I've had to, an example of some of the roadblocks that I've been in, that I've experienced. Getting the colors that I imagined on paper to correspond to the colors that the printer is able to reproduce is always really hard. And I've just learned over the months of doing it to avoid certain colors, or to kind of lay my expectations at the door. I feel like it's possible to put practicality first. The reason I don't is because the reason I start with my dream zine and go from there, as opposed to starting with practical and build up, I feel like there's the top down and there's the bottom up approach. I'm a top down person. I'm a dreamer first, and then I just start whittling down my dream to something that can actually happen. Somebody else could totally approach it from the, okay, I have $10 per person per zine. This is how I'm going to construct my thing. I don't work that way. That is just me as an artist. I have a really hard time being excited about a project once I've started calculating how much it will cost and all that stuff. It's always surprising to me how baffling collating pages is for me. I like to think of myself as like a reasonably intelligent person with a college degree, but for some reason, collating is just mind-boggling, and it's always surprising me how hard it is to do that. You might not have that problem. You might not. Yeah, you might have the kind of mind that just it's a breeze.
How do you solve that problem?
How do I solve collating? I always make a mock-up. That's a really good question. I almost always make a mock-up. I just take scrap paper and I construct a mock version of my zine, and I just scribble page 1, page 2, and then I deconstruct it and go from there. But I have it as a reference. Oh, this is what it's supposed to be like. And I work off of that. I have to do that. My brain does not contain, doesn't work otherwise. I guess I just want to reiterate what I said, what I was saying a while ago, that zine making is awesome because it's such a personal thing. Like, part of the definition of a zine is self-published. It's not always self-published, but it usually is. And that gives you so much power and freedom within the medium. And I want to re-stress what I said earlier, that my Lucy Rose approach to zine making doesn't need to have anything to do with somebody else's approach to zine making. If you wanted, like, and that's what I love about it. Like, I love other people's zines because they're not what I would have made. So you just get to, I would really say, just make something that is fun for you. Make something that gets you excited about toiling away during the times when it stops being fun. Yeah, like, if you want to make a zine about 10 different rotting leaves that you found in your leaf pile in the fall, and you just want to carefully illustrate each of the 10 leaves, and that's your zine, that sounds awesome. Like, I want to read that zine. Final thoughts. Have so much fun. You guys are going to make amazing zines. Your zines are going to be so cool. Please let me read them.